All right, welcome. In the year that the Bruins returned the Pooh Bear and the Meth Bear for the Winter Classic, it's been a historic season for the Boston Bruins, but it's cup or bust. This is kind of a reunion year. They brought Krejci back for a year, more likely than not to leave after this season. Bergeron, more likely than not to retire. It's their top two centermen, both on extremely discounted contracts. Let's talk about it. This is the year the Bruins need to make a push. They've geared up to make a pretty strong case to be Stanley Cup finalists and winners this year. But nonetheless, there are concerns with this team. It's not a perfect team. The lineup is pretty stacked. Overall, it's an excellent team, but there are underlying concerns that may prevent them from, being Stanley Cup winners this season. Let's talk about them. First, I want to start with the defensive pairing. The whole Grzelcyk on the first line thing, it's not great. If you go by almost any statistic other than plus minus, Grzelcyk is the sixth best defenseman on that team, not including like Zaboro, Riley, Strawman. Of seven guys that get regular playing time, including Orlov, Grzelcyk is about sixth in overall metrics. He takes the least amount of defensive zone draws. There's a lot. He's been deployed pretty well. But overall, on a first pairing line with McAvoy, it's been questionable at times. We've seen questionable defense at times. For the most part, they're good. McAvoy, I think, is playing on another level this season and really covers up a lot of those mistakes. And he's not perfect. He'll make mistakes on his own. But Grzelcyk's not there to help out with that. Grzelcyk is not a top pairing defenseman. It's just that simple. Second line with Lindholm and Carlo, it's just not working. It's not there. It's not a poor line. You have two very talented defensemen. But there are concerns with that line. Who's going into the offensive zone? Who's staying back for coverage? It doesn't matter. Both players at either point will drive into the offensive zone and will not have a forward covering in defense, leaving a potential breakaway. Again, this isn't a huge concern, this line. I think overall it's fine. But there are better options, right? Lindholm, McAvoy on that first line is one of the best defensive lines in hockey. That's a line you're going to put on the ice for 24, 25, maybe 26 minutes of time on ice per game. That's almost, a third to a half a game. Having your two best defensemen on the ice is kind of important. But, what about the other half, you say? Well, Lindholm and Clifton, and I'm getting these stats from moneypuck.com, advanced stats, regular stats, whatever you have but they do stats by defensive pairings when they're grouped together. Lindholm and Clifton, so one of the stingiest defensive pairings in all of hockey. They have worked very well together, and the first two lines I said, Lindholm, McAvoy, and then Clifton, Carlo, two of the best goal differentials of any defensive line in the entire NHL when they're paired together. There's your top four right there. That's like, I don't know, then you need what? I don't know, because the second line can play 20 more minutes a game. You're up to 45 minutes. You need 15 minutes from your third pairing defensive line. I don't know. Forbert's going to have to play. He's a penalty kill specialist. Not bad in his own zone. But Forbort and Grzelcyk are your two worst guys, and you got to play Orlov. So who's it going to be? Is it going to be, I don't know. You got those three guys you can swap out. They have depth on the blue line, which is good. But that is a concern. Metrically speaking, and really just the eyeball test if you watch these lines comparatively, their top four that have been paired together for, I don't know, months now, it's not great. It's not really improving. There needs to be some sort of shakeup there. There are better options that are not being deployed. Bringing Pastrnak down to the second line, I don't know, what was that, last season, to produce more depth offensive scoring? Good idea. That worked. You apply the same principle to moving Lindholm down to the second line, provide more depth defense. Didn't really work. Just throwing it out there. But I do have a lot of concern with Grzelcyk playing on that first line. Especially, I encourage anybody to go to Money Puck, take a look at the Bruins' defensive numbers, defensive stats, regular, advanced metrics, whatever, all of them. Where all the draws these players are taking are turnovers, giveaways. Grizzlies in the bottom of almost every one of those stats. So I'm just going to throw that out there. I think there are better options on defense, and I think it's led to some goals against that probably could have been avoided. Next up, I want to talk about the power play. It's kind of been brutal for quite some time. I don't know, a few months or second half of the season, really. It hasn't been great. And I think this is kind of where coaching adjustments really gets highlighted. The power play, the first unit on the power play, it just hasn't been working lately. And that's okay. There's been a few games where they've done well, and then there'll be like 10, 12 games without a power play goal. And you'll be like, all right, not that they need it, but as we've seen in past seasons in the playoffs, especially in the first round, there are games that are going to be decided on special teams. Half of these games, some of them, are going to be played on special teams. The penalty kill has been excellent. You really don't have to change much with that. That's great, but the power play is pretty concerning. It hasn't been good. For the amount of guys, the amount of historic 30 goal scorers on this team compared to really any other team in the NHL, there really shouldn't be these struggles on the power play, especially with some power play specialists. So I guess here's where coaching adjustments come in. We haven't seen Montgomery do really anything in terms of coaching adjustments that have really benefited. And again, I like Montgomery. I'm not saying he's a bad coach, but these are the little things you want to see. The power play isn't working for, 10 games, which is probably too long to wait. Maybe start the second unit for a power play. Maybe swap some players out. I don't know. See who's shooting, who's holding the puck from where. Or maybe, put Tyler Bertuzzi in front of the net. And that's actually worked out. That's where most of the power play goals have come from. Marchand hasn't been all that great on the power play, to be fair. You have a multitude of guys you can swap in for that spot. You don't have to keep Marchand on the first power play unit every single game because of his name and his history. You got to shake things up, and we haven't seen really any coaching adjustments from Montgomery most of this season. Which kind of leads me into the defensive pairings. Clearly, there's things that need to be shaken up on defense. Hasn't happened. Power play hasn't happened. Probably my biggest concern is the lack of coaching adjustments that have occurred really throughout the entire season. The first, 2 months when they had injuries or whatever, I don't even think it was 2 months, we did see Montgomery make some changes, play around with lines, find what works, and that was great. That worked out really well. Since then, there hasn't been a whole lot. It's concerning. It's very concerning, especially if you're not getting the matchups you need. You need to be able to shake up those lines. I don't know really what we've seen in terms of shakeups other than like the bottom six because you had to, because you're like resting people or whatever, or you have an injury. Like Nick Foligno's out, he can't play on the third line anymore. Guess Frederick's on the third line now, which is like fine. But there hasn't been a whole lot of adjustments made. Prime example, Brad Marchand. 17-game goalless drought. 17 games. Now, this is a guy who, over the last 5 years, has averaged well above a point per game. He's been excellent. I think he's averaged above a 30-goal pace each of the last 5 seasons, but he hasn't played full seasons or something. Don't quote me on that, but nonetheless, very talented offensive player. Can put the puck in the net. During this goalless drought, not a whole lot of assists. Quite a few turnovers. A lot of concerns. And that happens. Not every player is going to be 100% every night. There are going to be streaks of, going to be droughts and so on, and that's okay. But you also don't want to keep Marchand on the first power play unit, on the first line. You got to shake things up. I don't know, maybe a healthy scratch. We've seen other coaches scratch healthy star players in hopes to get them going again, get them motivated a little more. Not that Marchand isn't motivated, but we also don't know what goes on behind the scenes. That's, coaching adjustments, Marchand, prime example. Power play, terrible. First line, terrible. Jake DeBrusk is your first line goal scorer. That's it. And then Bergeron is maybe second, and Marchand is just there. You gotta be adjusting these players as the season progresses. Maybe you find something that works better. Maybe Marchand brings some exceptional depth to that third line, and Hall on that first line with Bergeron and DeBrusk just starts clicking and works and is going off. And you got 3 really talented lines, right? But we don't know because we haven't seen it. Coaching adjustments. Coyle also. The Coyle line. He got off to a good start. Great. He played one really good game against Minnesota because he always plays good against Minnesota because it seems like he resents Minnesota for not re-signing him or trading him. Right. So we always see him play well against Minnesota. Good. They play twice a year. Who cares? Other than that, it hasn't been great. And that's Charlie Coyle as a NHL player. And I'm not throwing a whole lot of shade. He's a great guy. He's extremely talented, and he's deployable in a lot of scenarios. He can play the penalty kill. He's defensively responsible. He's really strong on the puck. There's a lot of positives to Charlie Coyle. But the offensive production when that line is on the ice is pitiful. Tyler Bertuzzi, awful when he first came to Boston. He was on the Coyle line. It didn't work. Trent Frederick is probably the only one on that line. Trent Frederick and maybe Foligno. Frederick and Foligno together worked out pretty well. Taylor Hall on that line looks miserable. Taylor Hall looks fine on almost any other line, but that third line with Charlie Coyle, he doesn't look that great. There's reasons behind this. I don't know why. Coyle, not a whole lot of passing in this game, and that's fine. It's a different style of game. Coyle has to be the star of that line. And in reality, with the depth and the talent on this forward group, he's not going to be the star of the line. So there are concerns with that line. I don't know what you do. I think there are options. I think you could have Zakas be the third line center. Maybe you move Coyle down to the fourth line. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. I'm not saying Coyle's a fourth line player because he's one of the better third line centers in the league. But there are options, and I think that's where it comes back to coaching adjustments. Montgomery needs to play around with this. You can't just have set lines and just assume it's going to work out, and you lose. It's like, oh, it's the player's fault. It had nothing to do with me. It's it's kind of a bit of both. I also want to talk about Pastrnak, but I forgot to leave it off the board. Goaltending, I think, is a question mark too. The Bruins have been exceptional when they've gone in a goaltending tandem. They kind of swap out every other night, goalie for goalie. It's Ullmark, and then it's Swayman, then it's back to Ullmark, then it's Swayman. I think that would be a really interesting look for the Boston Bruins. Swayman and Ullmark though they play kind of similar, they have a lot of different styles in their game. And I think that can really throw off another team's game plan. There are a few teams that are going with goalie tandems this year, most notably the Minnesota Wild with Fleury and Gustafsson, which are kind of the two extremes. Fleury flops around. Gustafsson is like Tuukka Rask. Not very exciting, but very, very good at positioning. And just very good in overall. So that's kind of two extremes, but I think the goaltending tandem in Boston might work. I know Ullmark with his historic season, going to win the Vezina. Yeah, he's been excellent. There's no question about that. Swayman's been just as good, if not better, since the All-Star break. Their stats are very comparable since the All-Star break. I don't know. I think you go with both. I do. I think you get them both experience. Swayman's a restricted free agent. Ullmark signed for a couple more years. If you flip one, because their cap space, the Bruins' cap space is really tight, so we're talking about the future now. But you want them to both have playoff experience to see how they're both going to play in the playoffs. And maybe that's a deciding factor into which goalie you take. If you have to cut payroll and it has to be, Swayman's commanding $5 million, Ullmark has $5 million. They only have like $6.8 million in cap space, and they have a lot of roster spots they need to fill, including top 2 center spots. There are question marks. But a goaltending tandem for this playoffs may be beneficial. I don't know. I assume Montgomery's just going to play Ullmark until Ullmark isn't all that great. Maybe for a couple of games, and then they swap in Swayman, but by then it's too late. We'll see. But I do want to talk about Pastrnak. kind of what started this whole video, the concerns. And this is a concern I've had all season with David Pastrnak. Now, over 60 goals, over 100 points, destroying every other Boston Bruins player in terms of points per game, goals, and he's up there with assists. I think he's leading with assists too. Historic offensive season, but just offensively. There's been no defense to his game. It's been he can play defense. He's played defense under Bruce Cassidy and other times. There's been zero this game, this year, and he's been able to get away with it because of the players he's playing with. Zacha, I didn't realize how good defensively Zacha was. He's pretty underrated defensively. Wasn't expecting that. So there's that. Krejci's kind of underrated defensively. He's not like a Selke finalist or anything. Not even in that conversation. Probably shouldn't be, but responsible defensively. Even when he was playing on the first line with Marchand and Bergeron, both of those guys are Selke-ish players. Bergeron, one of the best defensive forwards in the game. Marchand should be in that conversation every year because he's that good. He's that good defensively. He is excellent defensively. Pastrnak hasn't really had to worry too much about defense, but this year it's just gone. There is no defense. Not only that, but Pasternak's always looking to make the big play. He's being a little selfish with the puck. I get it. You're having a great offensive season. You're in a contract year. You were in a contract year before they re-signed. He leads the league in turnovers. The whole league in turnovers. Now, you just watch a Bruins game and you just watch Pastrnak and just count how many times he loses the puck. Right? It's like, I don't know, 5 to 15 on any given night. Not every one of those it turns into a turnover in the stat column. He'll maybe like 2 a game, 2 turnovers a game, maybe 1 turnover a game. But nonetheless, like he is a liability when he has the puck. He's either scoring, making some pass in the slot, or he's turning the puck over. He's trying to be McDavid and take on the entire team, and it just leads to a turnover. It's led to some offensive breaks going the other way. He's been brutal to watch this season, but at the end of the game, even shifts. He just takes shifts off. It's not great. And then at the end of the game, he'll score like the game-winning goal from like some slot shot off a sweet pass, like he's put up on a tee. But he'll make the shot and it'll be placed perfectly. It'll go in. He'll be the hero of the game. That's great, and you need that. He's got that clutch factor, and that's fantastic. But you need more from David Pastrnak. You do. I think, going into this year, last few years, David Pastrnak, $11.5 million, no problem. Like that's fair market value. Fine. Probably a slightly better deal than you would get on the open market. After this year, I don't know. You're just paying for the offense, and he's always been an offensively oriented player, but there's so much more to his game that is now a liability. And if he turns over the puck in the wrong spot in a playoff game, especially Game 7 or something, it could cost him the goal. It could cost him the series. You gotta be responsible with the puck. Especially if you have intentions of winning a Stanley Cup, which this team needs to do this year. They just do. So those are my concerns with the Bruins. Let me know what you guys think, if you agree, if you disagree. Obviously, like, opinions. This is a lot of opinion. Again, I encourage you guys all to go to Money Puck. Just look at the stats, everyone's stats, defensive pairings, offensive lines, how they work together, how they've clicked together. What you think about Montgomery's adjustments? He might win Coach of the Year. And I get it, but there's more I want to see from him. I don't know if he loses some of these key players next year, which is a very real possibility, if he's even in the conversation next year. And he could be. I don't know. But I want to see more from Montgomery this year. And I know it's hard. It's a historic year. Most wins ever in an NHL season, most points ever in an NHL season. I know we got the whole extra point overtime loss system, and I get that. But nonetheless, it's still pretty historic, and it's the salary cap era. It's you're not supposed to have seasons like this. So there's a lot of credit to be thrown at the Boston Bruins. It's the reunion year. Cup or bust. Let me know what you guys think. I appreciate you. Take care.